I'm now showing you the fuel cell that was installed and the two aluminum angle aluminum or angle iron pieces that are put into that were fastened down to hold in the fuel tank. So this is 1.5 by 1.5 inch, about 1/8 inch thick, just stock aluminum from a big box store, cut out to this pre-specified the lengths that I needed. Now it works out that this is, by definition here, the fuel cell or the fuel tank that you can purchase from Renegade Hybrids for an older vintage 11 LS swap. So I bought their tank, and I had to engineer my own fasteners for the tank. So it has an upper square edge here, a rear square edge here, and I thought there would be no better way to fasten this down than to use aluminum angle stock here. And on the inside of this, on both this lower lip and upper lip, I have 1/8 inch thick adhesive rubber to cushion the gas tank. So this was all fit really well. And about a year ago, I fit the tank in, and during its final installation a year later, it all dropped into place. Of course, you can't ever, during a swap for an older car like this, you can't ever totally install any part that you want. So you don't install the fuel lines and then the radiator and everything completely step by step. You kind of have to judge which part goes in which area depending on the build and what you're doing. So naturally, in the front trunk, you have to first, I pulled the steering linkage and the steering rod and the steering shaft, and I put in a new Momo steering wheel. So the entire steering linkage came out, and the bearing, you can see straight down here, you can see the two bolts that fasten in the ball bearing set for the lower shaft that goes into the steering rack. So that was all pulled, and those are all new bearings. Everything was replaced. There's a new steering rack. So naturally, where I'm going with this is all the steering was pulled. So you have to do all the steering. But then there are new gauges that were put in. So all the wiring for the gauges has to be put in. So you have to think about the sequence of during the install, where that's going to go in and when that's going to go in. Then you have your fuel lines that you have to think about and where they go. That is, I don't want to depart too much from the fuel cell installation. So first things first, fuel cell. This is the Phytec in-tank electric fuel pump that ships with this cell. It's cut out, so it comes. I actually put this in because I had to do some wiring on the inside. So there's a gasket here, and then you have O-rings for each one of these down about here. You can use your OEM sending unit, there's a float in this that measures the gas level, and then just snap on your OEM pin. That's a sensor. And I used speed hut gauges. So you just look at directions and wire up the fuel level gauge wiring based on the instructions that come with the speed hut gauge. For the fuel lines here and the wiring, I suppose I should talk about that now. This is really a vent pipe. It looks like it's a 1/4 inch barb that comes out of the pump here, but you're not really going to be kicking out or spilling out new fluid, but rather it's just a breather, because as the fuel level goes down, you need somewhere for that air to come in. And so I ran a filter on the end of this. You can get these at O'Reilly or AutoZone. That's a 3/8 inch filter, just installed into the 3/8 inch Gates rubber hose for fuel lines. And I just have this zip tied down, so it can shake a little bit now, but I have to mount this in a more permanent fashion because I don't want this to rattle too much. So that would rattle with bumps, which is no good. I have to fasten it down. But then again, too, you're going to have fuel. This is a direct air line to your fuel tank. So this is steel, and these hose clamps are steel. So you have to think about safety. If you tied this up to something that was steel or a nut, this is aluminum here, but nevertheless, if you came over near steel and either the hose clamp steel or the screws for these hose clamps rubbed on some other steel, this is steel and this tip is steel. That spark, steel to steel sparks. So if you spark and there's gasoline fumes, this is a direct line into your gas tank, it's game over, kaboom. So you have to, this is sitting there loosely where it doesn't really rub on anything. So that's really tricky. So you have to watch out for that. I'll figure out what to do with that. I could just really bolt it down on the firewall so it doesn't move at all. If any listeners or readers have suggestions for that, just drop them in the comments. Back to this. This is your negative here. This is your positive. Positive goes to a relay. This goes to a big ground. This is the sending unit wire. This is your air vent. And this is your pressure, which goes to your regulator, and also the return line, which goes to your regulator. These lines for fuel are 6AN all the way. This is not PTFE. This is just CPE or rubber hose here. So it smells like gasoline. Now those go back. The pressure line comes on the right side here. The pressure line comes back and then routes to this this side of the fuel filter here. This is a fuel filter, then comes out, makes a turn. Those loose cables there are for the GPS speedometer and also the radio, the satellite antenna and the radio. They're just hanging, they're loose right now. So this is pressure. This is from the pump, fuel pump in the tank. Then I go down. This is what I've never shown before. These are aluminum 6AN, what are called bulkhead pass-through fittings. I purchased these from ICT Billet. They have 3 small, probably M5 Allen bolts here. So it's just a black aluminum filling. You have to drill the hole in the sheet metal here that for which you then install 1/2 of the fitting, and then the bolt screws on the other side. Then torque this down. Use blue Loctite on these. And this had to be these had to be tight because the fuel lines, as you can see, end up there inside a silicone rubber hose, which go down into the tunnel you can see between the 2 seats in the cockpit on the interior of the car. So I routed the fuel lines through the interior of the car in the tunnel. And these, at first I used CPE, just rubber fuel lines here. This is black nylon braided rubber, the Fragola lines from Motion Raceworks, which leach or diffuse gasoline. So if you put your nose right up to this hose, it'll smell like fresh gas. So I did that first, ran those, wasn't really aware of that, ran those 2 Fragola CPE, just straightforward black nylon braided rubber lines through the cockpit, and it smelled like fresh fuel every morning when I came out to the garage inside the cockpit. So that's going to stink up your leather. Yes, the interior will smell like gas. If you give someone a ride later on and you don't fix that, it'll be like, wow, what's the gas smell deal about? So then I replaced these with PTFE Teflon lines, for which there's a white Teflon line inside the fuel. These happen to be stainless steel braided, and I put mark color tape on to indicate which line I'm working on, so I know where it is in the back. So I taped the lines before I installed. So now these are Teflon CPE lines, and they do not smell of gasoline at all in the cockpit. So really clean. I coated them. I installed them inside silicone rubber radiator hose because I don't want them to chatter, and they're also zip tied inside this. Just because I don't want any lines to really move or rub up against metal. And that goes down through the through the tunnel, so there's not really any friction on anything. So this is still the fuel line install. Just wanted to point out those two ICT billet bulkhead pass-through fittings. It's all 6AN, the black aluminum. They happen to be Evil Energy from Amazon, so they are pretty good. I didn't, no, most of these are all Fragola, rather. I stand corrected. Sometimes if I needed a few of these, I'd buy them from Amazon as Evil Energy, and you can see the Evil Energy logo there. So that is an Evil Energy fuel filter, something like 10 micron. So if I ever develop any fuel filter issues, I'll just pull that. Okay, I think that pretty much covers the front end part of the fuel system install. On this other side here, let me talk about the welding here. So on these, I welded in these tabs into the sides of the front trunk on the bulkhead. On this side, driver's side, and then on the passenger side here, you can see here's a tab to hold the aluminum fasteners here that run longitudinally. And then there's one in the back. So what you do is as follows. You can see there a little bit of what's called the shuts. It's maybe 1/8 of an inch thick. So below this coating here, I put POR 15 on this. On this thicker portion here, that's the shuts. It's like SHUTZ. It's kind of the OEM undercoating from the 60s that Porsche used. Well, you take a die grinder with like 60 grit and grind that off where you're going to weld. So you go down to the metal, then you cut out, because this is only about 16 to 18 gauge steel. It's quite thin. So if you have a mount like this where you need to mount aluminum, you really can't mount this part here that the aluminum bolts into. You don't want to weld this into this 16 or 18 gauge. So what I did was cut out about, I think it's a 14. These are almost 1/8 of an inch thick. They're just shy of an 1/8. So it's 14 gauge steel, low carbon steel. You cut a tab out this way, grind down to your steel here, and then weld all the way around on the top and bottom of this tab. So you're thickening up this 16 to 18 gauge sheet steel here, which you'd burn through in a heartbeat. You're thickening this up by tacking all the way around. So you just put a thick layer of steel. So it's not much real stronger, but you just glue a piece of steel on there. Then you glue the thicker tab that's also 14 gauge onto that, up on the top and the bottom, so that this really is tied in now through these two beads here to a thicker piece of steel. So you can't, you have heavy stresses on here with, 15 gallons of fuel, which is as heavy as water, yanking on this aluminum bar here. There's a lot of stress on here. So this has to be held down. So you need some meat here. You can't weld into 16, 18 gauge. Do that all the way around for the tab on the back end there, for which this tab just sits above. Over here, the trick is that you cannot run this longitudinal aluminum piece here in the back all the way across the fuel tank, because you run into the outlet here, the input spigot for which your fuel comes down from when you're filling up the car. So I made a curve here. I cut that here in a 45, then welded this in. There's your 1/8 inch thick rubber cushioning below this, which is adhesive, glued up to stick to this. Then this comes over, and then that aluminum bar goes under this tab that was also welded in. That's a 5/16 bolt with a flat here. It's a flathead washer, a flathead nut. On the bottom is a flat and a lock with blue Loctite. Same thing here. You just go straight in the front. You just go straight across, and then you tie into your welded tab here. Let's see what else on this. As I said previously on another video that I quickly put together last week, this tab was welded in here onto this trans longitudinal bar here. And there's a 1/4 20 inch bolt that runs through here. that in the bottom of the chassis that looks brass is a quarter 20 riv nut. So where that quarter 20 bolt goes into the chassis, that bulkhead there, you first drill about, I think it's a 17/64 hole, and then you put in a quarter 20. No, it's larger than 17/64. That's for the smaller ones, M5s. So whatever it is for the appropriate rib nut size, you drill that hole. Then I put POR 15 2 coats, let it dry overnight. Then stuck the rib nut in, used the rib nut tool, crimped it, and then what's looking like that brass seat that bolt goes into is a quarter 20 thread. You then just tighten it down gently and use blue Loctite on that thread. And then here, that aluminum tab right here is on the fuel tank. And that's a 5/16. So you drill through this. Now, when you put the tank in, there's nowhere for you to put your fingers under the tank and hold the bolt and the washers for this bolt here. So I used super glue and super glued the lock bolt, the flat washer, the lock washer, and the bolt together by screwing it in when the tank was not installed, by screwing it in to center it on the hole that I drilled, and then glued all those together so that when I put this in, it just went straight in. Same thing, rinse and repeat on the other side, way down there, you can see that. So that's what you have to do to install a new fuel cell in a vintage 68 Porsche. This is a 912. So same thing for a 912. And this is more, it's pseudo resto mod as well as LS swap, but you can use your OEM gas tank. I just wanted to swap it out for a new gas tank because, actually I stand corrected, you do need to use a new fuel pump that's not OEM because these are 55 to 60 PSI. So this pressurized fuel line here is much, much higher than anything that you're going to get for OEM Porsche because it's electron fuel injection. Electric fuel injection. So EFI, you need 58 PSI for an LS swap. So you have a different fuel pump and you need a new tank. Continuing with the fuel line install, the fuel lines come down in the tunnel. Those two loomed cables that are coming out of there, one is for the condenser, the clutch on the AC compressor rather, and the other one is for the Corvette gas pedal that goes back to the ECM. This will all be covered with aluminum. There's slack here, so these can disappear way up front there, and then I'll run carpet up here to tone those down. Coat this with sound hardener, which you can see I have some. It's the original Dynamat that's about 20 years old. So I'll use some new soundproofing in here. There's your Corvette gas pedal. Car is running now. Brakes are installed. The new master cylinder, clutch is installed, ready to go. So the line continues down here. This is the numeric racing shifter that's installed. It's very nice. I have the 917 shift knob. That's solid wood, really nice. This shifter is like butter. Very precision, very little, there's no wobble in it at all. I also bought their extender on the back. I have new emergency brake cables, so that's working really nicely. So everything's new, a new shifter, new brake cables going back, new bellows for the shifter. Now we're looking at the back of the interior of the car in the tunnel. This is the return fuel line here. So you can see the stainless steel braided PTFE Teflon line that goes into this 6AN fitting. This is a bulkhead pass-through that's 6AN that I did get from Evil Energy, so it works, does a good job. I used Permatex Black on this to seal that after I torqued it down. And then the other pressure line is way back. You can just see the bolt, the black aluminum bolt way under there on the far side. So A little bit difficult tightening, but I got it nevertheless. And your wires that come through that are loomed, because you have significant wiring to come through the tunnel with an LS swap. So I hijacked the tunnel a lot to send a lot of wire, but there's plenty and plenty of zip ties so that nothing moves. And then I drilled out the side here to go to the computer, talk about that later. Continuing with the fuel system install. Here are the two fuel lines after they come out of a 90-degree fitting. Way over here, that's the transmission mount with the coolant lines there for the radiator. So your pressure and return to the regulator for fuel come around here. They curl up, they curve up. Then I have them fastened to the bottom of the seat buckets here with some Adele clamps, with stainless steel Adele clamps with rubber cushioning on them that not PTFE, but the CPE black rubber Frigola 6AN lines go through. Loctite on every time I use something like this. And then these go upward. And then I surround them with silicone radiator hose as they go near the engine, because I don't ever want them to really wear. Then I'll come out the top. And now I'm in the engine bay. And as I come out, you first run into a Y behind the engine here. So you fork to a Y with your pressure line. And then you send one of the lines, pressure lines, into the back of the fuel rail here. I can't really get the camera back there, but this is 6AN fitting. That's a 45-degree aluminum fitting there for 6AN. Coming into the Holley Sniper fuel rail for these 4 fuel injectors. And then on this side, the other fuel line, you use a Y pipe or a Y junction, and then run another PTFE line over here and come into the back of the fuel rail on your 6AN fitting to supply fuel for these 4 injectors here. Then you come out with a 90 6AN fitting out of this end of the fuel injector, come over, zip tie in, you come out of the fuel that passes your injectors here, and then you run this line, both of those over to the aeromotive regulator here. So to set the aeromotive, they come preset. Mine hit exactly 58 PSI, so it's right there in the sweet spot for LS's. This white is Permatex's white gasket. It's a white temperature proof, not proof, but it goes up to, I think, 400 Fahrenheit. And you have to use that all over any pressure sensors that you're using for your new gauges on the engine block, and even here. So you tighten this 1/8 NPT that goes into the aeromotive regulator here using that Permatex white sealant, and color-coded this in yellow, because on the other end of the wire there's yellow tape, so I know what it is. It's for the fuel. This goes to the fuel pressure gauge. And here are your 2 lines that come in, and then any excess pressure fuel that's not used comes back into, this is the return, coated with silicone rubber heater hose here that goes down the side of the block. This is all zip tied through there. And then that goes back through the bulkhead, through the cockpit in the tunnel, and then back up to the fuel pump, which is the return line. There's 2 lines that come out of the electronic fuel pump in the tank. So this is return here. Now I wired I plumbed in the fuel supply for this new LS3 engine, what's called full return style plumbing. So full return involves splitting your your pressurized line into 2 separate lines, coming in the back of both fuel rails. Then your fuel comes up here, and then you return each one of these to the regulator, and then any unused fuel goes back to your fuel pump, because there's a return in your pump. Now, if you don't use full return, you use what's called, it's kind of like the OEM setup for an LS, and it's also the same fuel rail that comes stock with any LS engine. You come into on that old OEM fuel rail that didn't use, you come in supply on one side of the fuel rail, it's aluminum, then it has an aluminum pipe that goes over to the other side, and then the other side is strictly fed by what comes out of the inlet here. And you're not using return, it's called a deadhead setup. So you're just supplying pressure in, and then it is what it is, and you use the fuel that you use, and then the fuel through each injector is what it is. So an injector that's up here is not really seeing, the pressure to all the injectors is not really equilibrated when you use a deadhead setup. There is a return, but it's not really, so I stand corrected, there is a return, but it's not equilibrated. However, in a full return setup, you split your pressurized line before you come, and you have two separate fuel rails. They're independent. So the 4 injectors on each side have equal pressure coming into them. And then any fuel not used is sent back to the regulator. So a full return type system guarantees that these 4 injectors here, 4 injectors here, see equal pressure, because you went into a Y pipe before the engine and before you routed in to the back ends of each one of your fuel rails. So these are independent fuel rails. This is just a piece of aluminum that the injectors go into, and fuel comes down this. The injectors with an O-ring just snap into this. Same thing on this side. So they're independent. So, and they see 58 PSI, but with a full return deadhead, which people will do if you only want to run a pressure line from your gas tank to your deadhead fuel rail, which a lot of people do. I did not go that route because I did not want injectors on the weak side to have lower fuel pressure because it changes performance. It's kind of, you get what you pay for. If you if you cut corners and use a deadhead fuel system, fuel supply route on an LS engine, you're cutting corners and you haven't done additional work to put in 2 independent fuel rails. Now these are just, this is just Holley EFI Sniper. I think you can see the logo. You can see the logo right there, EFI. It's Holley Sniper. But this is like, although it is a performance fuel rail system, it's bottom, it's not a race. It's not like the highest level fuel. People, you knock yourself out. You want to spend $500 or $1,000 for a fuel rail for an LS engine, do it. Some of your turnkey LSs, your 427s, your LS7s, might come, like really beefed up, that you buy for $30,000 new, right, with everything on the car, and it's totally done, right, a lot of racing stuff on it, $30K for the engine. They're going to have fuel rails on there that might cost $500, up to $750 or $1,000. These were several hundred. I think these were 3, so they are good. And the OEM rails also have real small. They have about 3/16-inch fuel supply holes for each one of the injectors. These are larger, and I said that in my previous video. So there you go. Full return style plumbing to guarantee that all the injectors see equal pressure by splitting your pressure fuel line into using a Y fitting and then running individual 6AN fuel hoses into the backs of your fuel rails, coming out, going over to your regulator here, and then sending back excess pressure fuel not used back to the return on the pump in the fuel cell. So there you go. That's a full review of the fuel system install for this new LS3. And there you go. If you have any questions, put them in comments.